So, is it the Christians' responsibility to preserve the environment, take steps to do it, and control population because we're densely populated? Where's that in the Bible? Many densely populated countries with relatively free economies are thriving. So are seldom mentioned by the overpopulation plotters, who prefer instead to focus on those relatively sparsely populated nations with oppressive governments, which are plagued with problems that can be misleadingly attributed to fecundity. Ethiopia's population density, for instance, is a scant 117 per square mile, and its per capita gross domestic product, GDP, is a pitiful $121. By contrast, economically free market Singapore enjoys a per capita GDP of $13,900, despite a population density of 12,464 per square mile. Similarly, Taiwan, with a population density nearly 5 times that of Red China, 1,503 compared to 315 per square mile, respectively. Taiwan produces nearly 25 times as much per capita gross national product, 8790 compared to 360. I wonder if that's improved a little bit for China in this day and age. Historically, the chief indicator of overpopulation has been the imbalance between a people and its food supply. The myth of overpopulation, Dr. Rushdoony recalls that the world, during its least populous eras, suffered most from hunger and famine. It was only when status controls receded in the late 19th century that hunger also began to recede, and Western civilization increasingly saw famine banished and hunger successfully dealt with. A far greater population enjoyed far greater supplies of food. With the rise of communism, welfare states, and other manifestations of big government in the 20th century, many of the destructive status controls returned. The essence of the problem, then, is that, Dr. Rushdoony continues, socialism inevitably creates an imbalance between the number of persons living in an area and the basic economic requirements. There is and always will be overpopulation under socialism. And the problems which socialism spawns will be used as the excuse to further augment the size, power, and reach of government. According to Dr. Rushdoony, the world does indeed face overpopulation, hunger, and famine, but only as it becomes more and more socialistic. Socialism has a poor record when it comes to elimination problems. Its answer adds up to eliminating people. In fact, one of socialism's major and chronic problems is simply people. Socialism always faces overpopulation. A free economy does not. What is the issue with one country wants to control a bunch of others? We go all the way back to when Europe was far superior to all the rest of the world, and we have colonialism. And he kept the colonies that they took over, depleted them of their resources, he kept them poor. 1974, biologist Francis P. Felice calculated that, as summarized by Dr. Kassoun, all the people in the world could be put into the state of Texas, forming one giant city with a population density less than that of many existing cities, and leaving the rest of the world empty. University of London economics professor Dr. Peter Bauer, a leading authority on third world development, has written, "Contemporary famines and food shortages occur mostly in sparsely populated subsistence economies with abundant land." He points out that the small size of farms and the low level of agricultural productivity over most of the less developed world reflect lack of skills, ambition, and energy or social beliefs and customs adverse to economic achievement, and not a shortage of land. When Colin Clark, former director of the Agricultural Economic Institute at Oxford University, analyzed the food-raising capabilities of the various types of land throughout the world, he concluded that if all farmers would employ the most productive methods, sufficient food could be raised to provide an American-style diet for 35.1 billion people, more than 6 times the present world population. Clark further estimated that at Japanese standards of consumption, more than 100 billion persons would be adequately fed, and the Japanese are arguably more healthy than we are. I wonder why he said that. Former Harvard Center for Population Studies Director Roger Revelle estimated in 1979 that the agricultural resources of the world were capable of providing an adequate diet, 2,500 kilocalories per day, as well as fiber, rubber, and beverages for 40 billion people, and that it would require the use of less than 1/4 of the Earth's ice-free land area. His figures were based on the assumption that average yields would be only 1/2 of those realized in the United States Midwest. Wow. Writing in the Wall Street Journal for September 1991, Hudson Institute fellow Dennis Avery, principal author of the Institute's book Global Food Progress 1991, agrees that the world isn't running out of food or farming resources. Avery insists that the per capita food supplies in the third world have increased 25% above subsistence since 1960, during the peak of the current population growth surge. The U.S. Agency for International Development's newly completed demographic survey shows third world birth rates slowing more rapidly than anyone had predicted, and third world food production continues to rise twice as fast as its population. Do we Christians need to step in and control population? Overall, Avery concludes the reality of the world's food and environmental gains are confirmed by all the major published data series, including the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Every reputable study of the world's carrying capacity has concluded that the world can feed its expected population growth. E. Calvin Beisner, author of Prospects for Growth. A biblical review or view of population resources in the future confirms that the combination of increased productivity and continuity in innovation have led to multiplying returns from resources, so that natural resources have actually become more abundant as population has increased. And the Cato Institute senior fellow Doug Bandow adds that there has been a steady increase in the estimated reserves of everything from copper to oil to zinc between 1985 and 1990. Alone, proven international petroleum reserves jumped by 400 billion barrels. Wonder how that is today. Similar, probably. Wei Gush wrote, back to Genesis, periodical brochure, the chief problem with man, according to the new agenda, is separation from his environment, and that man simply cannot be spiritually fulfilled unless this breach is restored. The Bible, however, as well as history, teaches exactly the opposite. The great crisis is not that man is separated from creation, but that he is separated from his Creator. Until this is rectified, man will only become increasingly alienated from his fellow man. And nature will become increasingly alienated from his fellow man. And nature will become increasingly distorted. The whole of creation groans and travails today. Really, it's literal. When you read the Bible, you think this is just figurative. No. Not because man has turned his back on nature, but because he has turned his back on God. The teaching that says man has a special dignity or is in some way above the animals is viewed today by environmentalists and New Age educators as utterly repugnant and as one of the chief causes for the decay in our environment. Evolution teaches that man is a mere animal made in the image of ape at best. For this reason, many school children are taught that the Native American religions are far more noble than Christianity. For in those beliefs, man is viewed holistically as a part of the natural world from which he evolved. If evolution is true, then nature is not so much to be cared for as it is to be revered as sacred. Revered as sacred, which is what our vice president espouses of those days. The biblical teachings that man is separate, being made in God's image, and that man has been commissioned to have dominion over nature, are held up for ridicule today. Of course, that's the problem. Even Christians violate this according to their own self-centered interests, which are godless. Even Christians, even believers. According to this new agenda, only if the environment is set right can there be any hope that man can live harmoniously with his fellow man and with nature. Yet the book of James declares that it is because of an internal problem, sin, that man is lusted, destroyed, and warred with his fellow man. And when believers and unbelievers sin, that sadly is the case. One hardly will ever learn today the real lesson from the French Revolution and more recently from the fall of the communist Soviet Union. This lesson is that man cannot be perfected by furnishing the proper teaching environment, for man's fundamental flaw is an internal one. Getting right with God is crucial to a healthy view of the environment, and both the Bible and history teach this. These hyper-environmentalists claim that because such problems as global warming and ozone depletion pose a clear and imminent threat, it will be only by the most concerted global effort, including the forging of a new spirituality, that disaster is to be averted. Most people are not aware that there is no consensus yet existing in the scientific community that global warming even has been determined to be real, much less to be dangerous. There's all kinds of things today that try to affirm that it's real, and we have some indicators of flooding in various places. But many years ago, in my young generation, my young years, there was a global cooling and a worry about an ice age. What happened to that? The Christian has been commanded by God to show a serious and sober concern for the environment. Although we should not shrink from accepting our part of the blame for the current state of the environment, amen, we must not be taken by this emerging new environmental religion. Man is indeed in grave danger today because of his separation not from nature but from the God who created nature. Lee states, Dr. Peter Raven, professor of botany at Washington University in St. Louis, has lamented that about 5% of the world's population, the U.S. produces 25% of the world's output of carbon dioxide, which is supposed to be global warming the globe to a dangerous degree. While there is little scientific basis for or actual evidence of global warming hypotheses, reductions in CO2 could prove disastrous to food production and water supplies worldwide. And plants love CO2. Take it away, they die. We don't eat. An increasing number of scientists are convinced that if anything, our planet is seriously deficient in CO2 and that a doubling or more would be highly beneficial. After all, CO2 is the major building block of life. Plants extract it from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and transforms it into food. A doubling of CO2 levels would not only greatly increase food supplies, but help conserve water as well, since plants exposed to higher levels of CO2 do not open their stomates, pores in the leaves, as well as when there is less CO2 in the air. The smaller the openings, the less water is lost into the atmosphere through evaporation. Dr. Sherwood B. Idso, the Agriculture Department of the U.S.'s Water Conservation Laboratory, has persuasively argued that a doubling of the CO2 content of the atmosphere will produce a tremendous greening of planet Earth. He explains that as the CO2 content rises, plants will obviously be able to grow and survive in areas where they currently cannot because of a lack of water. That means that you should see a tremendous redistribution of plants on the face of the Earth. In addition, forests should greatly expand their ranges. In a most recent State of the World report, in those days, released in January this year, World Watch Institute lamented that freshwater shortages are occurring in the U.S. and elsewhere, while worldwide stocks of rice are at a 20-year low.